Good morning, everybody. It is time for another day of reading. We are reading from our text, Solving Problems Through Technology. We're going to be reading A Lucky Accident again today. So if you do not have your book, Solving Problems Through Technology, go ahead and pause the video and get it now and open up to page 6. So our clear target for today says, I can describe how a sequence of events led to the invention of hook and loop fasteners. Now let's take a look at this target. What are we going to do? We are going to describe, and that's our verb. Remember, if we're describing something, we're giving a lot of detail. We may use adjectives and adverbs, but we're definitely giving a lot of details about how or what something is. In this case, we are describing how a sequence of events led to, so we're making connections here today, led to the invention of hook and loop fasteners. Now we're going to look at a sequence of events. A sequence of events. What does the word sequence mean? Tell me what you think the word sequence means. Sequence shows us the order of events. So we could change the word sequence to order of events. Another word we might see besides sequence is series. And we'll talk more about this word in a few minutes. Series. So let's take a look again. What is our clear target for today? Go ahead and repeat this after me. I can describe how a sequence of events led to the invention of hook and loop fasteners. Excellent. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in and look at these details. Let's see what's going on. What are we describing? What sequence of events are we describing? And how did those sequence of events lead to, how are they connected to the invention of the hook and loop fasteners? So let's take a look again at this chart here about what connections in an informational text are. Before we read these, I want you to tell me, what are a few ways that we have learned to make connections in a text? Yeah, you probably said things like we make connections to ourselves in our real life. We make connections when we look at the pictures to maybe something else that we have read before. So we make connections to other books. We make connections to real world activities. Those are different ways we have made connections. We've also made connections from one book to another book this year. The way that we're looking at connections right now is in a singular information text or in more than one text on the same subject. So when we're making connections as we're reading a text, we're looking for how things are related, So think about that word related. Related means that something is similar, but it's not exactly the same. It's like if you have cousins or if you have aunts or uncles, even your mom and dad, or even siblings, you're related, but you're not exactly the same, are you? But you're related. So you're looking for how things are related in technical procedures, scientific processes, and historical events. Those are the kinds that we look at in second grade. And historical events is kind of what we're looking at right now. That's what we're focusing on. And a little technical procedures. We might see that some in this unit too, but really the historical events. Because remember, we're looking today how to describe how a sequence of events led to the invention of hook and loop fasteners. In that sequence of events here, we're looking at a historical event, something that happened in history. So let's take a closer look at what we are going to look for when we are looking for those connections. What are our clues? What's our strategies? One thing we can do is look at steps or sequences that are happening. Another thing we could do is look at a series of events. We can look at the cause and effect relationships in a passage or a problem and solution. We're focusing today on this part, steps and sequences or series of events. Let's take a closer look at what sequences are.
Sequencing of events. A sequence is the order of events in a story. In the order in which they took place. There are clue words in every story.
So let's think about what she said first. Remember, a sequence of events is the order of events, the order of how things took place in a story. And now we're looking at clue words that are in stories that can help us discover those sequences of events.
That can help you figure out the sequence or the order. First, next, then, and last. We call these words.
So we've seen those words before, haven't we? First, next, then, and last. And we have used those whenever we're writing in our narratives, right? So a lot of times, writers, authors are going to use those transition words or those clue words to help us to be able to follow the sequence of events or series of events that are taking place within a story. Now, the words first, next, then, or last can be replaced with some other words. Here are a few examples of those.
So these are some words that I can use to replace first. These are some words I can use to replace next. I can use these words to replace then, or these words to replace last.
So I see that there's a lot of choices here. So if I'm looking for what happened first in a story, I might see something like to begin, in the beginning, it all began, to start with, or one day. I might see those exact words, or I may see a sentence that gives me the clue that I can tell that it was what started in the beginning. And I can look at the same thing here for next, then, and last. Next, I might see the word secondly, afterwards, after a while, later that day, or suddenly. For the word then, I might see the word also, additionally, all of a sudden, or the next day. And for the word last, I might see at last, or finally, eventually, or in conclusion. So those clue words will help us whenever we're trying to find the sequence of events or the series of events that are happening. So what is a sequence or series of events? We kind of talked about that, right? It's the order of events that are happening. So how can I identify the sequence or series of events? That's where we look at those time order words. Those time order words. Those are going to help us be able to identify. So let's look at some of these skills here, or strategies, I should say. So I'm going to look for the clues for the order of the events, and these transition words help me in looking for those clues. So that's step one. That's my first strategy. So I want you to pause and repeat that first strategy My first strategy to look for my sequence of events is to look for my clue words. Look for my clue words. Go ahead and pause and repeat that first strategy. Good. Okay, so our next strategy is going to be pausing to think about how each event is connected to the next event. How each event is connected to the next event. So just identifying the order is not enough if we want to describe how something leads to something else, right? We want to understand how they are connected. So we can ask questions like, why did this cause that? How did this happen? What might happen next? These are some questions that will help us as we're trying to make the connections between the series of or sequence of events that we have been reading. So let's take a minute and watch Miss Kathy as she practices these two strategies. Strategy 1, look for clues for the order of events. Strategy 2, think about how each event is connected. So I'm going back to the story, A Woman with Vision, and I'm going to use these skills to describe how a sequence of events led to the invention of windshield wipers. Okay, so I'm going to do that to get you ready for your goal to describe how a sequence of events led to the invention of hook and loop fasteners. So watch me how I describe how a sequence of events led to the invention of windshield wipers. So I'm going to get a different color. We did a lot of annotating with main topic. So you probably have a lot of annotations on your own booklet. So find a different color when you do your annotations today. And Miss Kathy's going to stick to purple today. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is go through my reading. We've read this story several times, so I'm going to read kind of quickly. And I'm going to focus on first looking for the clues for the order of events. My clues are usually in my transition words. First, next, then, and last. And remember, there's lots of ways to say first, next, then, and last. So I really have to think about, while I'm reading, what category each of these are going to go in. So let's get started. No one would ride in a car that was driven by someone wearing a blindfold. It would be a disaster. But the first cars did not have windshield wipers. Okay, so I'm seeing it saying the first cars. That means I'm looking at something that happened a long time ago. I feel like this is the beginning to lead me to know how the windshield wiper was invented. So this is building some background knowledge for us in the text. Heavy snow and rain could obscure the driver's vision, so drivers could not see the road. Remember, obscure means diminish or get in the way of. So it could get in the way of the driver's vision or their ability to see. Drivers had to stop the car. They had to get out. They had to clear the windshield by hand. Only then could they drive on. Okay, so all of this is some background knowledge that we see. Drivers had to stop the car, get out, and clean the windshield by hand. So all of this is what was happening first. And I'm going to look at this here. I have a good visual representation. This illustration gives me a good idea of what it looked like whenever cars did not have windshield wipers. Years ago, a driver had to clear the windshield by hand. Mary Anderson, 1866 to 1953, changed that. Okay, so she changed that. What that did she change? it's referring back to what was happening here. Okay. In 1903, she was riding in a streetcar. Okay, so if I look over here in the beginning, that's a first there. So now I'm starting to see how Mary Anderson changed all of this. Remember, this over here is kind of my background information. This is my background information. But now I see here in 1903, it's starting the story of how Mary Anderson changed all of that. Now I can look at describing the sequence of events that led to the change, which was the invention of the windshield wiper. So let's really look at this. In 1903, in the beginning, those kind of go together, okay, because we're starting at the beginning. In 1903, she was riding in a streetcar. The weather was bad. She saw drivers constantly stopping to clean their windshields. Okay, so what was she doing? She was riding in the streetcar. The weather was bad. She saw drivers constantly cleaning their windshields. She thought there had to be a better way. There had to be a better way. Now, when we are looking at she thought, this could kind of go with all of a sudden, right? Or the next day. Notice that we're looking at something that happened because of these others. So I can go ahead and put 3 here. She thought there had to be a better way. She invented a window clearing device. So finally, that's what she did. People who drove could control the wipers from inside their cars. The first wipers were manual, not motorized, but Anderson's invention changed cars forever. Changed cars forever. She made driving safer. Okay, there's some important information for us to know, right? This picture down here shows us what it looked like while Mary Anderson was driving on the street. And I can imagine what the streetcars looked like and how frustrating that must have been. And then here in this caption, I can see, wow, she really put a lot of hard work into this. She designed it. She drew it out. I can imagine all the thinking that had to happen. But when I go back and I'm focusing on my clear target, describing how a sequence of events led to the invention of hook and loop fasteners, or in this case, led to the invention of windshield wipers, I'm really just focusing on this area here that I numbered, right? Because there's the events that happen that led to it. So now I want to describe it. So to describe it, I'm going to go back and I'm going to read that again. I want to talk about what happened first, what happened next, then what happened, and what happened last. And then I want to think about how those events are connected. So I want you to think about that for a minute. We've read through each of these, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have found the order or the sequence or the series of events that took place. Now I want you to think about for a minute, how are these things connected? Okay, so a connection you may have made is that she thought there had to be a better way. She thought there had to be a better way. I can also make an inference here. I can imagine myself driving in this car and seeing people stopping and thinking, wow, we are here riding in these cars and it takes so long for people to get out. And then I bet it says over here that it obscured drivers' visions. I bet that people were not able to see well, and maybe she saw people get into an accident or almost get into accidents because they couldn't see very well, even when it was time to stop to get out and clean off their windshield wipers. Okay, so that's a way that we can think about how the sequence of events led to the invention of hook and loop. Notice that we're not just listing each of the events, we're thinking about how one thing caused another thing. Okay? All right, so let's get going and do this together now. So open your book to page 6 if you haven't already, and we are going to look at a lucky accident, and we are going to describe how the sequence of events led to the invention of the hook and loop fasteners. Remember, we want to take a look at those transition words, right, for clues, and we want to describe the connections between the series of events. So we want to use those strategies that we were talking about before. And let's take another look at those strategies just to be sure we remember them. Remember, we want to look for the clues for the order of the events. And then we want to pause to think about each event or about how each event is connected to the next event. So we're going to look for clues for the order of the events. And then we're going to think about how each event is connected to the next. So pause for a minute and I want you to repeat that after me. My strategies for describing how events led to inventions is to look for clues for the order of events and then think about how each event is connected to the next. Good. Okay, so we're going to read the first two paragraphs together, and we're going to annotate this focusing on the sequence of events that led to the invention of the hook and loop fasteners. So we're going to read and annotate. We're going to do paragraphs 1 and 2 together. Remember to get a different color to annotate today so you know that you're focusing on the sequence of events with this color. Miss Kathy's using purple. Okay, let's read paragraphs 1 and 2. Scientists often work for years to make a breakthrough invention. Many never do. Others invent things almost by accident. George de Mestral, 1907 to 1990, was hiking in the woods one day. One day, there's that clue word. So I can see he was hiking in the woods one day. And this is where we get started. He was in the mountains of Switzerland. His overcoat and his dog's fur got covered in prickly plants. Okay, so this is telling us where he was. And then his overcoat and dog's fur got covered with prickly plants. The plants are called burrs. So I'm going to say this is the second event. To pick off the burrs, he needed to give them a tug. Now, I think this is important because once we read through there, we saw that it was because it was a little difficult for him to get it off that he got curious, right? So I'm going to say to pick them off, he needed to give them a tug. So that's going to be what happened third. De Mestral was an engineer. He wondered what made the bird's grip so strong. So here we go. What happened after he took his walk through the woods and he had to give it a tug? He wondered. So it got him to thinking. He looked at them closely with a microscope. Okay, so he looked at them closely with a microscope. After he started wondering about it, he took some action, didn't he? And he started researching about it. He noticed tiny hooks on the burrs. They tightly held the fabric. Okay, so after he did some research, he noticed that the tiny hooks on the burr held the fabric tightly. So there we are. There's the next thing that happened. So we can, this is as much as I'm going to do with you. I want you to do the rest on your own. I want you to think about, I want you to go through and read the rest of the story and continue with the same pattern that Miss Kathy has done here. So I went ahead and put in some of my notes, or did some of my underlining, but let's look at the sequence. So 6, he noticed tiny hooks on the burrs and they held tight to the fabric. Then here, Maestro did some experiments. Then it shows what he found, that those hooks caught on anything with loops. And then after 8 years, he came up with his invention. And here, this last part, it describes his invention. So we have 9 that covers that was what he did after 8 years and what that invention actually looked like. So all of this would be that 9th step. Okay, so we have gone through and we have looked at some clue words, and I want you to share with me what are some of the clue words that you found throughout that helped you know the order of things. Just give me 1 or 2. Okay, I know that one clue word that we found was at the beginning. It said one day. So that was a word that let us know what was happening in the beginning, right? Another one that I noticed was the word then. That was another clue word that helped me to move through here, that after these things happened, then these things happened, right? And you may have found others that helped you as well. So remember, the next part is we want to make connections between each of these things. We want to make connections between each thing that happened. So if we look up here at 1, he was hiking in the woods. His overcoat and his dog's fur got covered in prickly plants. In order to pick the plants off, or to pick the birds off, he had to give them a good tug. That led to him wondering what made the burr's grip so strong. So he was very curious, right? So that's something that I would say here whenever I'm describing this. I would say, when de Maistral noticed that it was difficult to pull the prickly plants off his dog's fur and his overcoat, that made him curious, right? That made him curious. Why did they grip so strong? So then he decided to look at them more closely, right? So that's where the connectiveness comes in first. And this is where that lucky accident comes in, right? So he was kind of lucky, right? Because he went out there and this happened. But if he wasn't curious, would it have happened? So I want to be sure that I talk about that he was curious here, because that's a big connection between what happened. So I want you to think about more of these. I want you to go back through each of these and really think about those connections. Why did this lead to this? Why did this lead to this? Right? So you're going to pause the video here and you're going to go back to your Seesaw page and answer the questions on that page. You'll just record yourself answering those questions. You're going to answer the question, what words signal the sequence of events? And then out loud, you're going to describe the events that led to George's invention. Then you're going to discuss the connections that you made from one event to the other. These are not your personal connections. These are how are each of these events connected to one another? How are each of them connected to one another? When you finish, come back to the video. Okay, now you've had time to really think about what's going on in there. You have had time to think about what the sequence of events are. You have had time to think about how those events are connected. And now it's time to hit your clear target. Now you are going to describe with your words, you're going to describe how the sequence of events led to the invention of hook and loop fasteners. And you're going to use this writing response to help guide you. You'll do this on Seesaw. Hook and loop fasteners came about because of luck and hard work. Use text evidence from the story to describe the series of events that support this statement. So when you're going back now to describe how this sequence of events led to invention of the hook and loop fasteners, you're going to use the lens, or you're going to use the thoughts, luck and hard work, right? So what parts of it was lucky? What parts of it was hard work? And here are some sentence starters for you. This first part is going to be about luck. So I read on page blank. So go back and tell me what page it was. That blank. Tell me what you read. Don't just type what's in the story. Put it in your own words. I read on page blank that blank happened, right? This shows me that it was luck because how did that event show that part of what led to the invention was luck? And then you're going to look at it through the lens of hard work. I read on page blank that, and you're going to put it in your own words, right? You're going to put it in your own words, and you're going to think about hard work. Which part of that sequence of events was hard work? This shows me that it took hard work because, and that's where your connections come in. What did Mistral do show that it took hard work? All right, take your time on this. Whenever you finish, come back to the video and we'll review. Let's review what we've learned today. So we learned that making connections in an informational text, we are looking at things like technical procedures, scientific processes, and historical events. Today we focused on steps in a sequence or series of events. We learned that in order to identify that series of events and really be able to describe them, that we need to look for clues for the order of the events. And those clues are our transition words. And we learned that after we identify those, we want to think about how each event is connected to the next. And here are some questions we can ask ourselves. Why did we do all this? Why did we do all this? We know what we did. We described how the sequence of events led to the invention of hook and loop fasteners. But how does this help us in our reading? I want you to think about that for a moment. How does describing a connection between a series of events improve your understanding of a text? How did doing this exercise today help you understand what you were reading better? Take a minute to answer that question. Great, and we're going to share some of those answers out next time we're together. I hope that you found that looking deeper and looking closer at your text helped you to understand how the different things in your informational text was related. And that way it helps you understand what was going on. Excellent job, everybody. Have a wonderful day.